Hello and welcome to Written Words. I'm Helen, and in this video I would like to share 5 suggestions of ways to enjoy poetry. Poetry is something I enjoy very much. I love to read it and I love to write it. But in recent years I've had far too many conversations with people who've said to me that school put them off poetry for life. There are lots of people who don't read poetry because they've been put off it by the way it was taught to them at school. So I thought I would make a video to explain what it is that I like about poetry and hopefully give you some ideas of things that you could try to get more out of reading poetry. So there will be no exam questions and there will be no terminology that you have to go away and learn. Simply a few ideas of ways to enjoy poetry. So the first thing, which I've come to understand more and more as I've got older, is don't care what other people think. Poetry is personal. You should like what you like because you like it, not because somebody else told you you should like it. And perhaps that's the problem with our school experience. We're given particular poems that we have to study. Usually they are wonderful poems that have stood the test of time and are much loved by many people. But not everything appeals to everybody. Some people think that rules and specific forms of poetry are important, while other people are believers in free verse. Some poets are well known and well loved by many people, and other poets are much less well known, but not necessarily any worse. You may find some little gems in their work that you really enjoy. What you like is entirely up to you. It's like eating. Lots of people like ice cream. But if you don't like it, that doesn't matter. You can always eat cake or chips instead. So take a poem, read it, think about it. And when you've done that, if the poem doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. Set it aside and move on and try something else. There is so much poetry out there by so many different poets writing in so many different styles from so many different eras that there is something for everybody out there. It's just a case of finding it. Just take one poem at a time. Don't overface yourself. Don't plan to read a whole book full of poetry straight away. Just take one poem and savour it and see what you can get out of it. I highly recommend finding an anthology. An anthology is a book with lots of different poems by lots of different poets. So it's a good way to explore poetry and find out what you like and what you don't like. I have 3 anthologies that I use a lot. This Ladybird one I've had since I was a child, and it just contains 20 poems. And it's very colourful. Each page is a different colour and it's beautifully illustrated. And there was a time when I knew most of those poems by heart. Then I have this one, which is called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, and other poems you half remember from school. So this book is setting out to do what I'm trying to do in this video. It's trying to emphasise that the poems that you learnt in school weren't just for exams. They can also be enjoyed just for themselves. And the other anthology I have is this rather elderly one from 1967, and it has a large selection of poems from the 14th century and Geoffrey Chaucer right up to what was the present day when it was published in the 1960s. So I'm going to illustrate some of my points with some poems from this anthology. My second way to enjoy poetry is to look for the story. Some poems will literally do that. They will tell a story. There are many, many poems, especially epic ones, that tell a whole story. But all poems will tell some kind of story, even if that's just a small scene, or a message that the poet is trying to convey through the poem as a whole. So take the poem as a whole and see if you can work out what the poem is trying to tell you. Is it an actual story? Is it a scene? Is there a message in there? What is that poem telling you? So taking a poem from my anthology, I'm going to look at On the Sea by John Keats. So I'm going to read the poem, and while you listen to it, see if you can work out what the overall message is in this poem. What is this poem's story? On the sea. It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, and with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns, till the spell of Hecate leaves them their old shadowy sound. Often 'tis in such gentle temper found, that scarcely will the very smallest shell be moved for days from where it sometime fell, when last the winds of heaven were unbound. O ye who have your eyeballs vexed and tired, feast them upon the wideness of the sea. O ye whose ears are dinned with uproar rude, or fed too much with cloying melody, sit ye near some old cavern's mouth and brood, until ye start as if the sea nymphs choired. So there is some powerful vocabulary in here. We have words like eternal and mighty and wideness, emphasizing how powerful the sea is. But we're also told about its powers to calm and restore. At the end of the poem, the poet is telling us that the powerful sea is an antidote to our busy, chaotic lives. So the overall message of this poem is that the sea is powerful and everlasting, and it has the power to cure life's ills if we pay enough attention to it and appreciate its power and its vastness. Point number 3 on our journey of poetic discovery is, can you spot any clever techniques? There are lots of techniques that poets use to convey their message and to add musicality and beauty to their poem. There are lots of things that you can do with words to create a particular effect. In some of my previous videos, I've mentioned techniques such as similes and metaphors, onomatopoeia, alliteration, personification, and many other things. Imagery is very important to a poet. Very often a poet will talk about one thing when they actually mean something else. So let's take a look at an example of that in Francis Thompson's To a Snowflake. This short poem is describing a snowflake. And as we all know, a snowflake is made of ice. But not in this poem. In this poem, the poet describes the snowflake as if it is a piece of intricate metalwork. And the craftsman doing this metalwork is God. The material he's using is silver vapour, and the tools he's using are the hammer of wind and the graver of frost. So here is To a Snowflake by Francis Thompson. What heart could have thought you, past our devisal, O filigree petal, fashioned so purely, fragilely, surely, from what paradisal, imagineless metal, too costly for cost? Who hammered you, wrought you from argentine vapour? God was my shaper, passing surmisal. He hammered, he wrought me from curled silver vapour. To lust of his mind, thou couldst not have thought me. So purely, so palely, tinily, surely, mightily, frailly, insculped and embossed, with his hammer of wind and his graver of frost. Part 4 is, what is the poem's shape? I have seen poems that are quite literally written in a particular shape, such as the shape of a tree or a drop of water. But all poems have some kind of shape, and there are different ways to give poems shape. What is the poem's structure? Is it arranged in neat stanzas with lines that are all the same length with a regular rhyming pattern? Or is it more varied? Is a word, a line, or a group of lines repeated for effect, rather like a song where you might have a verse and a chorus and a verse and a chorus, where the verses are all different but the chorus keeps coming back the same every time? You can do the same in poetry. Is there rhyme? And if there is, what is the pattern of the rhyme? Or maybe there isn't rhyme and the poet has used other techniques to give the poem its musicality. Whether or not a poem should rhyme is a very common debate, and if you'd like to explore that further, do take a look at my earlier video on should poems rhyme. And does the poem have a particular rhythm? When you read it, does it give you a sense of a certain rhythm? My next poem definitely does have a rhythm to it, and it has rhyme, and it has repetition. The poem is So We'll Go No More A-Roving by Lord Byron. It's a short poem with just 3 stanzas, each with 4 lines, but there is a definite structure to it. The first stanza and the third stanza echo each other. They have a lot in common. The first stanza begins, So we'll go no more a-roving. And the third stanza contains the line, Yet we'll go no more a-roving. Both the first and third stanzas mention the word night and moon. They have a lot in common. But the stanza in the middle, the second one, is different. This stanza explains the reason why we'll go no more a-roving. So the first and the last one make a statement, while the middle one explains that statement. So the structure helps with the meaning of the poem as well. So here is So We'll Go No More A-Roving by Lord Byron. So we'll go no more a-roving, so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving, and the moon be still as bright. For the sword outwears its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. Though the night was made for loving, and the day returns too soon, yet we'll go no more a-roving by the light of the moon. And then my final suggestion is read it aloud. Poetry is a form of music made with words, and music needs to be heard aloud. So take the poem that you're exploring and read it aloud like nobody's listening. Read it aloud just for you. Perform it, and if you like, you can even dance to it. When you read a poem aloud, enjoy the feel of the words in your mouth. Enjoy the sounds they make. And enjoy the feel of the rhythm. Feel the rhythm in your whole body. The poem I'm going to read now is by Emily Brontë. There is a lot of weather in this poem, and it's bad weather. We have phrases like, the wild winds coldly blow. Wild winds is something that really does sound like what it is if you put enough emphasis and drama into the words. Then she talks about the trees, their bare boughs weighed with snow. And if you put enough weight on the word weighed, you can almost feel those branches bending under the heavy snow. Like our last poem, this one has 3 stanzas with 4 lines in each. And there is a structure to it. The last line of each stanza is different. It's shorter, and it's not about weather. The first stanza ends with the line, and I cannot go. So that short, staccato firmness and repetition is almost like her finger wagging. I cannot go. And then the second stanza ends with, and yet I cannot go. So again, the same pattern to the words and some repetition. And the final line of the poem, I will not, cannot go. Again, you can almost feel her finger wagging, because there is something about this place. Despite the terrible weather, she wants to stay where she is. She should go home and stay warm and dry, but there's something in this place that's keeping her there. That means she cannot go. So here is the full poem. The night is darkening round me. The wild winds coldly blow. But a tyrant spell has bound me, and I cannot go. The giant trees are bending, their bare boughs weighed with snow, and the storm is fast descending, and yet I cannot go. Clouds beyond clouds above me, wastes beyond wastes below, but nothing drear can move me. I will not, cannot go. It is indeed a fun poem to read aloud and try to put drama into it. So those are some of the things that I do to help me enjoy poetry. And those ideas work for reading poetry, but some of them also work for writing poetry as well. So I hope you found some inspiration in there to try some new poetry and explore and see what you can find and build a collection of poems that you enjoy. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. In my next one, I'm going to look at some of the nitty-gritty of punctuation, and I'm going to look at the humble comma. So I hope you will join me in that one. And in the meantime, happy reading and happy writing.